Hello, it's me, Fanny. Today I'm going to talk about northern Sweden. It's a place where I lived for 4 years in my early 20s, and it's definitely a place that's worth visiting. Of course, Sweden being a very, let's say, oblong country, like it's very tall and rather narrow, um, it has several climate zones within the country. Like with most of it having a very long coastline and the Baltic Sea, and also insulated from the Atlantic by Norway and Denmark, it has kind of a strange climate. Like it's both like it's never completely dry, very rarely, but at the same time, it's also humid enough. So you never get like the real continental weather in there. Like, of course, you can get snowstorms, you can get blizzards, and stuff like that, but it's never as extreme as, for example, here in Canada. Um, the variations are much more slight, both when it comes to temperatures and when it comes to the weather in general. Of course, this year, due to climate change, we actually had a whole host of problems with the forest fires. So there are, unfortunately, changes affect all countries, no matter where in the world you are. Anyway, let's get back to northern Sweden and my experiences of that and why you should go visit northern Sweden. First of all, it's beautiful. In summer, you get these long, really bright days because, well, the northernmost part, you're actually above the polar circle. So um, you do get the full day, like it never actually gets dark. You have to make sure to look at like your digital watch and see if it's AM or PM, because sometimes it can be difficult to tell if you've been up for a long time. I was there when I was in my early 20s, like I said, so of course sometimes you were with friends and you'd been doing things for the whole day, and then maybe had a few drinks, and then all of a sudden, like, shouldn't it be night? But no, night doesn't come in summer. So it was all just a long, very active day. Like for a month in July, you basically don't sleep because um, well, you don't really feel like you need to because it's always so light. But then, of course, you do need to because sleep is important. And the opposite in winter, like for a month, you might not have the sun go more than like a finger width above the horizon, but at the same time, um, you get this beautiful Arctic winter where it's so cold that the air, like the little moisture that's in the air, it crystallizes on everything, and everything is kind of sparkly and glittery. Um, it's absolutely magical. And then, of course, if you're lucky, you get to see the northern lights. It's mostly in late autumn, I believe, that it's easiest to spot it, because I guess then the Earth is tilted the right way towards the sun. Northern lights are actually formed by electrons that are spun due to um, the magnetic field of the Earth, and they shoot out photons. So that's why you see northern lights. Um, it's all physics. Wow. Anyway, so that's basically the environment you can get there. Fall is very short, and spring is also very abrupt, and then all of a sudden it's summer. So you don't get the very long seasons. Like if you're in the south of Sweden, winter can often feel like just an extended period of fall because it's you do get some snowfall, but it's much more humid, so it often turns into rain and like sub-zero rain, and you get a little bit of ice and slushy. But it's not really that pure winter. While in the north of Sweden, you go from, okay, it's August, and then all of a sudden in September it will start snowing, and then the ground will be covered basically by the end of October. Of course, it can melt away and then come back, but basically from October you can expect to have winter up there. And the things you can do, one thing that's very fun is snowmobile. Um, Basically, if you haven't seen one, it's a motorcycle on uh, what's it called? Bandwagons? Like the bands underneath. Uh, what's it called? Um, yeah, snowmobiles. And if you're Swedish, it requires a certain driver's license. I don't know if they have that rule anymore, but they did back when I lived up there. I don't quite know if you have another driver's license, if that would cover it. But anyway, it's worth looking up, and it's so much fun to drive them. If you turn a little bit too fast, like with any vehicle, you can sort of dig down deep into the snow. That happened to me once. It took quite an effort to get the snowmobile out of there, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. Another fun thing to do is dog sledding. So obviously you have a train of dogs that you put in front of a sled, and then they pull it. You need to have experienced drivers because it's not always easy to tell the dogs which way they're supposed to go, and the dogs need to be trained specifically for this type of task because it's hard work for them. But mostly they think it's really fun. So there are several breeds that are specifically sort of bred to do that type of work because you can't just take a little dachshund and hope that he will be a sled dog. No, they're particular breeds that enjoy running for extended periods of time. Speaking of dogs, I have to let Arya back inside. Come on. Also, another thing that's important in northern Sweden to explore and to try out is the food. Like anywhere you go, try the food. But in northern Sweden, of course, there's more wilderness, so they will have more dishes based on wild game. At least that was my experience. There was a lot more moose and elk, and since I was in an area that with a lot of Sami people, there was also caribou or reindeer. So there's some local things that you definitely should try. The basically reindeer kebab, um, or reindeer shawarma, you could almost call it, is called sovas, and basically you take a hunk of meat, a reindeer, and you fry it up in a big pan. I've seen it used in Turkish type of cooking. Middle East, I think it's used a lot. Like this big, it looks like a wok pan, gigantic. And then some salt in there, some fat in there. You mix it all around, and then you eat it in a flatbread. It's so good. Um, Also, a thing they do in northern Sweden with their coffee. There are several different things. Like if you're out on the mountain, you don't bring a lot of supplies with you. You just bring the necessities. So maybe you don't have a coffee filter with you or stuff like that. So the boiling coffee is quite common. And that's basically you have much more coarsely ground coffee. So you put that into your coffee pot, put that on the fire, and then let that boil. And then since it's so roughly ground, you won't get as many coffee grounds within your cup because it's easier to sift out. They will end up on the bottom anyway. And usually they add a little bit of salt in their coffee. I don't quite know why, but it's something that I noticed that they do. Um, and then there's the magical thing that's called kaffeost. So it's coffee cheese that you cut up into small cubes, like think about a sugar cube or smaller, and then you put maybe 5 of them in a cup of hot coffee, and the cheese will the milk fat in the cheese will melt and end up on top, and the rest of it sort of sinks down to the bottom. And what you end up with is, if you ever had butter coffee, it starts out like that, and then at the end you get the nice surprise with a little bit of chewy cheese. That's, if you've ever had halloumi, it's similar to that, but not grilled and not as salty. Oh, it's so good, and I miss it a lot. Um, and there are many different types of bread. There's a dish called palt, which I think is rye flour with pork cracklings inside, and then you fry up the whole thing. Um, and you eat it with lingonsylt. I don't know if you eat it with gravy or heavy cream, because I've seen both, and I think it's maybe regional, or butter. Anyway, you add fat to the whole thing, and it's also really tasty. It's a very hearty meal, and there's that thing called paltkoma, which is because after that meal you will be in a state of coma, because it's like Thanksgiving but in one meal, like in one thing. It's very, very tasty. What's more? When you go north in Sweden, you will notice that most of it is covered in forest. Very little of it is the so-called boreal forest, or old, well-preserved forest, because Sweden has had industrial levels of for what's it called, like lumber, timber working for a long time, but then replant and then do the same thing over and over again. So very little of it is untouched, but like it's brought some wealth to the country. So there are obviously two parts to everything. Um, but anyway, you will notice that a lot of it is covered in trees, and sometimes you will have pastures where you will see cows and horses, sometimes sheep, and like it's obviously Sweden is an industrial nation. Like it's a very high tech country. A lot of software companies work there, but we also have the kind of quaint countryside that is a nice complement to all that high tech stuff and all the like mining things that go on as well. Connected to the mining thing is the city of Kiruna. Surface wise, it's one of the largest cities or municipalities in Sweden, but it's one of the very, very smallest um, in population size. And that's, I think, the largest, what you could call a city, the northernmost in Sweden. So it covers a large area towards the Norwegian and Finnish border. So that's not that strange. Um, but it would be large in comparison to its population size. But what's interesting about that city is that because of the iron mine that's there, and the way that the ore body is in the ground, they've been digging underneath it and sort of undermined the entire city. So for several years, they've been moving the city because they can't have it sinking down into the mine, which was basically what started happening. Um, so to preserve for example, the church that's there and several like um, buildings of historical value, they had to move them, take them down and move them to safe locations that are not at risk of falling down into the mine shaft. Not the mine shaft, but like where the roof of the mine is collapsing. It's quite dramatic, and I shouldn't laugh at it, but at the same time, like as humans, we do this to ourselves, even though we know better. Anyway, so they're moving the city of Kiruna, and it's actually working out for them. Even though, of course, it's a hassle. If you have a house in Kiruna and you have to move it, it's not very fun. That's a beautiful city too. Like any of the cities in Norrland, you really should visit. And like it often feels like the northern part, like even the entire northern half of Sweden is forgotten. Like there's Västerbotten, there's Västermanland, I don't know where that is. There's Västerbotten, there's Norrland, and there's Lapland. Like these overlap, but they're it's, the areas are so cool, and you can see so many different things. The city of Luleå, for example, it's got this really fresh air to it. It's quite astounding. Um, the first time I went north that far on my own, I took the train all the way north when I was going to the Hädelstensteknik education or gemology education in Lannavaara. At first, my entire class went to Luleå, and I took the train up there. It took like 2 days to get there, a day and a half. But I stepped off the train early in the morning, and the breath of fresh air that I got was it was shocking. Like I had traveled before, but I'd never really, I wasn't expecting that from the city up there. And then I had to find my hotel and the hostel and meet all my classmates and stuff. So that was quite interesting and quite an experience. So yeah, expect fresh air, expect a lot of nature. Like if you're up there, you will notice that people are more in tune with nature than if you go to Stockholm, for example. Those will instead go to the archipelago that are outside Stockholm. Like obviously people will go to the environments where they are, but oh my god, I'm rambling today. I'm so sorry. Uh, but like it's people are in tune with what's around them because there's so much of it. Like there's so much nature that if you weren't in tune with it, you would miss out on a lot, a lot of the world. I guess maybe that's a nice note to end on. Maybe, yeah, I think so. There's a lot of nature to see in northern Sweden. You can walk up mountains. You can trek in the fields. You can go into the forests. There's so much to see. There's so much to do. Um, no matter really when you go, it will be beautiful. Sometimes there will be a lot of mosquitoes, but that happens in basically every country, so they're everywhere. Um, um, but due to Sweden's roaming laws, you're actually allowed to stay um, with tents and things on like as long as you clean up after yourself, take care of the environment around there, don't leave any trash, you're allowed to camp there for one night and then move on. So it's something I highly recommend, and it's beautiful. You should go. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And please tell me, have you been to northern Sweden? Do you want to go? What would you like to see up there? And would you go in winter and see all this sparkle, snow, and all of that? Or would you go in summer and experience picking berries and seeing the eternal day? Like, what would you rather see in northern Sweden? And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.